Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today we are excited, but I think extra excited to have our good friend Emily Varon here on the podcast. Emily is a BCBA and sleep educator and the owner and founder of Ready Set Sleep, home of the Sleep Collective, which is, our first sleep certification for BCBAs. I think this is probably Emily's second or third time on the podcast, just because
Third,
we
yeah.
love your message. We love hanging out with you, and we're so excited to hear an update. So, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a pleasure. It's always so exciting. I always get really excited before I see you guys pop up for anything.
It's
So,
just so
I
nice,
mean,
Emily, because we're friends and we banter back and forth. And it's nice because it's like, well, I'm not getting nervous before a podcast because I'm just talking to Emily.
yeah, it's fun to have people like on a text thread on the side. And like we've shared time together at ABAI. And I don't know. Guess you're
yeah,
right.
but I think it's also because the topic is so important and you are very passionate about sleep, but not just passionate, like educated and, really making change within how BCBAs approach sleep. And I think for any of us that have, practiced and have worked with parents and have worked with, a number of kids by now, we know how important that piece is. So we are also excited to hear more about sleep and what we can do to kind of, move it along so that we are compassionate in sleep training, that we are, trauma sensitive and all of those pieces. So we're excited to hear, maybe start with um, a little bit of an update as to what you've been up
Yeah.
to recently since we last heard from you.
Gosh, since we last spoke, I have graduated 111 certified behavioral sleep specialists from the
Wow.
Sleep Collective.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's really exciting. Everyone is doing great, and we're actually coming up on our first recertification cycle in January. So that is going to be a rollout. But I love the people who come into the collective. Everyone is just so passionate. People take the CEUs. People take things and then through that CEU process, like if you just like grab something about feeding or sleep or trauma informed care or whatever, for some, especially newly minted BCBAs, they hear this stuff and they get excited and then they don't know what to do with that excitement. And so I love having, people who have been in the profession, for 15, 20 years and these newly minted BCBAs who are, say things like, I've always been interested in sleep and I have no idea how to use that interest. And so I get like this group of really excited people. So it's fun. It's fun to share sleep passion and sleep geekery, not a word, but to geek out on sleep with people who are equally as passionate. Not everyone has the same passion for everyone for everything. And I tell people who ask me questions about the Sleep Collective, I just say, if it's your passion, if you love it, then do it. But the Sleep Collective isn't for everyone. It doesn't have to be for everyone, you know? But so I get the people who are just really excited.
And I think
Go on.
part of the reason, like, sleep can be pretty intimidating. I know a lot of the new
Yes.
BCBAs I work with, like, it's hard because you're almost completely dependent on, we can't be there all
Yep.
night for at least most
Yep.
people. I don't know. There may be some who sleep over. You're kind of dependent on the parents to like give you
Yep.
the information, to be
Yep.
following through on things that you have to give them suggestions that are actually doable in the middle of the night. And we're not there to kind of like really guide them through where a lot of things that happen during the day, we can support, we have a better understanding of, we can see it. A lot of what we rely on is the observation. And
Yep.
so I get that sleep can be really, really intimidating. I think it's so valuable to have a place to go where BCBAs, whether it's newly minted or more experienced ones, can go and really get properly trained on it because it doesn't really come up in our supervision, in our task list, in any one of those places that we would feel really confident in. So I think that that's so important. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like, the current research that you're involved in with sleep. And also I think you have you're developing a tool that will be really helpful for BCBAs.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've been using the sleep assessment form in the collective since the beginning because the people who are using the tool are being trained at the same time. The hope with this research is that the tool we've been using can serve as a standalone tool for BCBAs who have no training to still be able to move through the steps of a sleep assessment process and develop a meaningful plan from it. And so you said something interesting a second ago, which is, sleep can be intimidating and, we're not going to be there at night and we have to rely on families' reports and things like that. But so much of what sleep involves starts from the morning. It starts with prerequisite skills. If a child can't separate from their caregivers during session, that child is not going to be able to separate in a healthy way from their caregiver at bedtime. So we don't have to be there at bedtime to display that. We can see it during the day. We can see the children who have trouble calming their engines down. Those kids who are just moving, who never sit still. I can walk into a clinic and find those kids and say, there's a sleep problem. There's a sleep problem, right? These are these very evident red flags. And if they're not able to calm themselves down during session, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to adhere to a bedtime routine and calm down in an efficient way. And so in that regard, so much of the programming we do starts during the day. It starts with daytime schedules. Is the 9-year-old napping? Okay, we can help the family control for that. We don't have to be there at bedtime. So most of the things we learn are all doable during the day so that once we get to the point where we are perhaps fostering independent sleep, and by the way, that's not involved in every single sleep program. A lot of people assume that like this quote unquote sleep training is part of it, but it's not. Most of it has to do with the control of setting events. And then if we have to get to the point where we're sleep training at night, the child is so chock full of prerequisite skills and capabilities that whatever plan we give the families should be extremely low behavioral, extremely easily doable, already having been practiced during the day to mastery so that all the families have to do is plug and play. So this notion that we have to give protocols for middle of the night awakenings and we're not going to be there and how do we do it? I've never written a behavior plan for a middle of the night awakening because it's all controlled at bedtime and it's all controlled during the day. And so that's really the piece that we have to educate BCBAs on, to know that you don't have to be there at night. You don't have to be there in the middle of the night. You don't have to rely on, parents to mess up your extinction plan and reinforce the behavior. And then then they come into clinic the next day and they go, or the session the next day and the parents go, yeah, we did it, but then, they were crying so hard, or they were so upset that we just laid down with them. And we don't have to interpret that. We don't have to say like, oh, well, no big deal. We're still making progress. Keep going. Like, I don't want to be the cheerleader. Just keep doing the same thing. Keep eliciting that negative response, that aversive response. Like, what is the abandonment rate on extinction procedures? I would like to see that research.
It's probably high.
It's probably pretty high. And so there's another assumption there that, sleep has to include extinction. Like sleep teaching has to include some kind of a extinction procedure.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that as we're moving towards a more, sensitive approach with parents, I'm going to speak a little bit as a parent now. I know when push comes to shove, there's like that last little bit that like you just had to, I don't know, cry it out for a little bit, or you just had to kind of push through that last little bit. And I know, for example, we have the parents who their kid is sleeping in their parents' bed, also nursing, also waking up in the middle of the night, also like all of the things. And then there's the approach of, let's create the environment where we want them to sleep in and just do it all at once. Like if they should be in their room, in their bed, and not nursing and independent sleep. So I'd love to hear more about like the approach. Is that the approach? Kind of like rip off the Band-Aid and do it all at once? Or like how can we, based on what you said, previously with a more sensitive approach, how can we approach something like that where it just seems like all of the problems are happening at night, and it's not, they may not stop nursing during the day, or they're okay with detaching, but it's like, just at night, they have this like crazy combination of things that we, they do want to end.
Yeah.
I also
It's
think,
the everything everywhere all at once theory, right? Sorry, Shayna, were you going to ask a question?
no, go ahead.
Yeah, it's the everything everywhere all at once theory where if we just do it all at once, it'll reduce the trauma. It will reduce the I don't know, in ABA terms, the response effort. Maybe we only have to do it 2 nights. But that philosophy, I feel like, is very deeply rooted in infant sleep training, where it's possible to do all of those things for, a 6-month-old or a 9-month-old or a 4-month-old, or even potentially a 1-year-old sometimes. And so there is a very widely accepted protocol where we're just going to change everything at once. And there was a CEU that was launched I guess a year and a half ago, where the BCBA said, you should just do it all at once. Start everything at the same time. And I really disagree with that philosophy. I think that philosophy comes from, well, it's going to be hard, so let's just make it hard over 2 nights instead of hard over 6 months. And for me, I would argue it should never be hard. Because we're dealing with parents implementing eventually at the end of the night. They're going to be doing the bedtime routine that hopefully we're going to set up. But we don't want our parents to fail, and giving them all of these things to do at once is just, to me, it's not best practices. And it's not what Greg Hanley calls today's ABA, right? It doesn't feel like today's ABA when we say, okay, you're going to change the sleep environment, the sleep schedule, you're going to change your sleep dependencies, right? The parent laying down with the child or nursing, to your point, or bottle feeding or whatever it is. And we're going to change, the bedtime routine, and we're going to just do it all at once. So that might sound easy, but I think we really have to be client-centric here and say, are we working with, a 2-year-old who has, a mild behavior profile? Or are we dealing with a 9-year-old who's going to put his head through a wall? There's a big difference in the way we approach treatment for those 2 individuals, right? And we do treat 9-year-olds. We don't just treat infants and toddlers. I'm doing a treatment plan right now with a 23-year-old in his residential facility because he's having disruptive middle of the night awakenings and then napping from 9 to 10 in the morning. So if I were to do everything everywhere all at once with a 23-year-old, that doesn't fall under compassionate care, in my opinion.
I also think that when we're putting together plans, we have to look at the individual, and yes, we have to think about compassionate care and today's ABA, but we also need to look at the parents. And, Shira said, taking off my BCBA hat and putting on my parent hat, I am somebody who values sleep. And when my sleep gets disrupted, it's hard for me. And I would say, the next day is tough, and, you compound that. So you look at parents who haven't slept in 6 months or 3 years or 6 years.
Or 9 years. Yeah.
They're traumatized as well.
Yeah.
And, they're anxious and say, let's rip off the Band-Aid and let's do this all at once, but they're also exhausted. So the minute it becomes hard at night, as much as they say, and they're desperate for change, they can't. It's too much. So we also need to look at the parents and say, what are they capable of? And it's not about, just the child in trauma, but looking at the parent as well.
I think that's a really astute observation, because many of the families that come across, our desk, so to speak, who we encounter, have been traumatized to some degree. And, look, trauma is a big word, right? I don't think any of them have been, to the point where, pain and suffering or anything like that. But, trauma just really results in this kind of abative effect where they just don't want to do it again, where they've tried things. Maybe we have that 9-year-old or that 12-year-old or whatever. And they tried things when the child was 3, and they tried things when the child was 5. And all of the things that they have ever tried have been aversive, have stimulated big behaviors, have, big air quotes, not worked. And so when they come to us, sometimes the tendency is to say, you know what, it's not that big of a problem. I know that you're seeing these sleep problems because we see them during session. It's not like they're secret. But, they come to us and they say, we just can't work on it right now. Or it's just not a priority right now. Or you know what? We just can't right now. That to me, I teach in the collective that's like red flag language. That's where we dig a little deeper, because that is an indication to me that the family has a history there, or a preconceived notion that this is going to be very behavioral, that this is going to be very intensive, that this is going to be very hard. And I always, challenge my BCBAs to say, let's talk this through. Is the reason that you want to put it on the back burner because you think it's going to be very hard? Because you think that there's going to be an escalation of behaviors involved? Do you think it's because your child is going to be put in danger? Right? If we're talking about the profound autism population, they could be getting put in danger, like literally. And to ask a little bit more and give some assurances that the things that we start during the day, start when the family has bandwidth, start with very easy points of entry. And that's one of the things we learn is, what are those easy points of entry for the family? We start with the thing that's going to give them the most bang for their buck and where they're going to see some level of results right away. So what does that mean? The family that just can't figure out what time bedtime is, where the child just falls asleep all the time, asking about morning wake up times. Well, we find that the morning wake up times are all over the map. They're 6, they're 9, they're 10, they're 7. We just don't know when the child's going to wake up. So we start with a consistent morning wake up time across 2 or 3 days, like not across 6 months, friends, not across 10 days of data, but 2 or 3 days. And then we see, hey, are they now more tired at and we'll do a calculation using just kind of like age-related sleep norms. If the child needs to be awake, let's say 13 hours from morning wake up. Do you find now that with that average, let's just call it a 7 a.m. morning wake up, do you find now that they seem more tired around 8:30? Are you having an easier time implementing a bedtime routine at this time? Are you having an easier time, right? That's where we start. No behaviors. We're not even like moving the kids' cheese, right?
Okay, so what if we know as a BCBA that this is important, that the sleep really is, a challenge, the parents are hesitant, and they don't want to tackle it either because of a previous trauma. But we know that this is really the, part of the root of a lot of things that are going on during the day, it would help to work on these things, even if it's during the day and it's very slowly, but parents aren't really, they're very nervous about tackling sleep in general. Do you have any advice for that?
I would say that that's the most common thing that we encounter, is just a barrier to starting, not a barrier to progress. There might not be any barriers to progress. There's just a barrier to starting, because of parents' hesitations to start anything and wanting to put it on the back burner, sometimes because they want to work on something else instead. Right. And so it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's not a single sum game. We don't have to, work on sleep and not work on speech and not work on manding and not work on, matching and functional communication and, all the other things that we work on during an ABA program, the hundreds of things that we work on. It's not a single sum game. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And so what I encourage people to do is talk to families, about that preconceived notion of what they think it's going to be. B, frame it in a way of, if we were to be able to work on some of these prerequisite skills during ABA session, would you be open to us adding things like a waiting protocol, a healthy separation protocol, closed-ended tasks? These are all things that kids need to do. A calming program. Can we start introducing some calming sensory instead of putting the kid on the trampoline during session? Just, not teaching the body how to calm itself. All of these things can be done in the scope of ABA sessions, and they all fall under the medical model, and they all fall under ethical practices. We are thinking of it now through the lens of it being beneficial at bedtime. Most parents will say yes to that. And so that's like an easy point of entry, right? And we have to describe the fact that it's not going to be either or. That's thing one, right? That's thing one. Thing two is that education piece on the direct effect poor sleep has on daytime functioning and the child's ability to access learning. To me, that's the key point for BCBAs and a very good reason and rationale for moving through and treating sleep. Because poor sleep, you're not going to meet your goals. You're going to have those graphs that look like, an EEG.
It's true.
They're not going to be these beautifully progressing graphs, and we're not going to see this amazing data under poorly slept conditions.
But what you could do is also correlate that with, a night of sleep. Like even just as education, you can track how much they slept at night to behavior data or learning data, and just use that as a good way. And as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, but then there's this whole iPad thing and that's the biggest problem. But then you started explaining and I said, you know what, instead of focusing on no iPad at bedtime, let's focus on tolerating transitioning from an iPad during an ABA session or building other leisure skills. And I think that would make it so much more palatable for parents to take, offer other alternatives if they knew that they had other skills and that they weren't going to have, a major meltdown when they take it away. So it's so true.
I say this in my CEUs all the time, like when I speak. If bedtime is the first time during the day when a child is being asked to separate from their technology, it's not going to go well. And this is the everything everywhere all at once, right? This is that rip the Band-Aid off. Are we really expecting families to just take the iPad away at bedtime and then we call them weak when they don't follow through? When we are using our ABA time to build up the reinforcing value of the iPad, hello.
Ouch.
Ouch, right? We need to find other reinforcers and other alternative activities, not even necessarily leisure activities. It can just be neutral activities, right? Can the child separate from their technology to do a folder task? Neutral. It doesn't have to be aversive. Some kids find it aversive, whatever. But finding those things, it can be kinetic sand. It can be beans and rice bins. It can be, shaving cream, like a little shaving cream. It could be some kind of a transition. And what we talk about is figuring out what that descending hierarchy is going to look like. So we're not transitioning from technology to bedtime. I mean, can we figure out a bigger punisher? Can we put more punishment on the transition to bedtime, right? So how are we going to design this descending hierarchy, this bedtime routine that is not going to be aversive to the child and not going to be aversive to the family? We have to work on that during the day. We can practice bedtime routines during ABA sessions.
Not to mention, sorry, Shara, not to mention, you're also, when you're teaching those things, you're teaching them good skills to have, period, for life. It's not about transitioning away from the iPad just for bed. I'm thinking about it as transitioning away from an iPad for anything, dinner, eating, something else, is so crucial. The waiting is so crucial for so many things. Being able to do other leisure activities or neutral activities is so important. So, positioning this as, hey, I'm teaching these skills for bedtime is great. But if parents don't have that follow through, or it's not important to me at this point in time, those skills in general are important for life.
Yes. And we can practice these things to mastery during the day. That's our superpower, is practicing all of these things to mastery during the day so that when it comes to bedtime, the parent has already seen proof of product, proof of concept, whatever. The parent has already seen them go through a mock bedtime routine. It doesn't have to include a bath. Okay, I'm not going to bathe the child. But if we're talking about a descending hierarchy of activities, of preference activities, if we're talking about a little healthy separation so that caregivers can get a little space at bedtime, right? We're going to practice that during the day with caregivers present if possible. If we're in a clinic-based setting, it might look a little different. It might be presenting a very specific SD, right? Like, I'll be right back, and have the child tolerate engaging in a neutral activity while the BCBA comes and goes, now we've conditioned a very predictable response to the SD of I'll be right back, or whatever the word is. It doesn't have to be I'll be right back. It could be hang out here, buddy. Whatever the SD is, we're going to condition it during the day. And then we say to parents, I want you to practice this when you get home from school today. We're not going to say go practice it at bedtime. No, we're going to say, hey, practice this for 10 or 15 minutes when you guys get home from school, or maybe during the bedtime routine, maybe. Or, hey, let's practice it on the weekend. Hey, can you take some time practicing this on the weekend? I want to make sure that when you give this SD that we give all the time and we have seen work, I want to make sure that you're comfortable with that. So why don't you go home this weekend, practice this a bunch of times during the day, maybe, 3 or 4 times a day, whatever it is, we give them the criteria. And then let's connect on Monday and I want to know how it went. If it didn't go well, we have to tell parents, okay, let's do it this way instead. Let's do it under these conditions instead. Let's make sure the child is engaged in a pleasing activity. Let's make sure that whatever it is. And then we tweak it until the caregiver, I'm just using the healthy separation as a specific example, or that SD conditioning, but until the caregiver is comfortable doing it during the day, exclusive of sleep, then we have something to work with. I'm not going to saddle them with doing this at bedtime. Oh, hey, by the way, at 8:00 at night tonight, I want you to practice leaving the room. Hey, it works for us. Whenever we say, I'll be right back, the child stays. So you should do this too. No.
And I think what I'm hearing you say, and I think what's also like trauma informed, trauma sensitive, today's ABA, all of these things that we're starting to explore and learn more about based on what you're saying, it's really our superpower of shaping. And I think that that comes up in so many contexts.
Yes.
That it's so, there's so much value in that we don't even realize. And we can shape, like that's kind of our super strength. We could take a skill and instead of like ripping the Band-Aid and just doing it all at once, we're so good at breaking it down into small and accomplishable tasks for the student, for the parent. And so we have to like really learn about that more and continue to hone our skill of shaping so that we can practice in this way.
Look, a perfect example that I use all the time is crossing the street. When we want to teach a child to cross the street, do we go to the main intersection of our town and say, okay, let's do this? No, we start in the living room. We start with red light, green light. We start with safety signals. We start with, responding to name. We start with responding to stop. We start with these very low level things that shouldn't elicit big behaviors, right? Because if we force the child to hold our hand while crossing the street at a major intersection, and that's how we're doing it, and we're going to shape it from holding hands crossing, no, that's not what we're going to do. It's a safety risk. And I would argue that there are safety risks involved for certain learners in just taking that approach to sleep too. It's the profoundly autistic child who will, hurt themselves or hurt their caregivers or destroy property,
Yeah, they can't be alone at night. And when they're up, their caregiver's up. Just to keep them safe sometimes. As much as you can remove all the furniture and all the dangerous things, like it could be a light bulb that, becomes dangerous. And so it really is a safety hazard.
Correct.
And not only for the individual, but their parents, but also siblings as well.
Yeah, we forget about the siblings sometimes. We want it to be comfortable for the whole family. Sleep should be happy. Sleep should be something that we look forward to at the end of the day. It shouldn't be the aversive necessity that just kind of happens at the end of, a long day or, a long stressful day for many children. It should be enjoyable. It should be, a means of winding down. And I don't know, I think it should be happy and full of joy.
It's definitely
part of
reinforcement for me.
Everyone should think about sleep the way I think about sleep. It should be full.
You're saying this as I'm holding back a yawn. I'm like, oh, yes, that would be really great right now.
Love sleep. Everyone should find it reinforcing. And look, it's a primary reinforcer. It's supposed to be reinforcing. How does it become aversive from a primary reinforcer? setting events, learning histories, like all of that shape up a person's, and I'm not even going to just talk about, the ABA population, but your, aversion, my husband's aversion to sleep, a lot of like hardworking adults are out there, delaying sleep onset for whatever reason, for no gain, for no apparent gain or benefit. Just
Just
kind
so
of,
quiet at night,
it's,
like it's when I get to watch my shows.
yeah,
That's
like wind down time. It's quiet time.
Right?
okay. So, what advice would you have for a BCBA who is just starting to explore sleep, besides for getting, joining your collective, which we highly recommend. And
Yeah.
we'll share in the show notes how to do that. What's some advice that you would have for that BCBA who may still feel intimidated, who, wants to start to get into this but isn't sure how?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are a few different CEUs out there that you can get. They're kind of broad strokes, real basic. I have CEUs that are I have a bundle, or I have individual CEUs. But you can also just, start reading and looking into things, listening to podcasts. The problem is the advice is challenging because there aren't a lot of resources for the autism population or the special needs population in general when it comes to prerequisite skills, when it comes to utilizing the medical model to implement an ethical ABA program that is sleep centric, right? You're not going to find that stuff. It really only exists in some CEUs, my content. It's not easy to find because most of the research and most of the data is taken. Well, I mean, the things we see the most are which strategies are most common and most effective. But I take issue with that because the most effective ones and the most common ones aren't necessarily the best ones, right? So you'll hear that extinction and graduated extinction are the most effective and the most commonly used. Does that make those procedures right? I mean, I would argue against that because I've seen other procedures work equally as well. I don't have the research to back that up, but there are lots of protocols that we have that fall under the scope of ABA. We're not just a one-trick pony. We don't just have access to extinction and graduated extinction. And so, they talk about bedtime fading, which is like more like schedule adjustment, sleep restriction, things like that. But these are kind of individual tools, when introduced in isolation, are not effective. It has to be part of a comprehensive treatment program, right? So we get families who, and I'm going off the topic from your original question, but I will come back. I'll circle back. I'm meandering, but there are oh, you know what? I lost my thought anyway. I was going to come back to it. It was going to meander and then come back to it, but I lost my thought. Anyway, so as far as research goes, as far as tools, as far as advice, I would just say ask more questions. Find those things where the child is having challenges during the day. Really get to know your clients and your families so that you can have an open conversation about it. So that at the very least, you can refer them to, we don't want to refer them back to their pediatricians, but refer them to another, certified behavioral sleep specialist. Now we have over 100. So maybe there's someone in their community that could help treat them. Don't refer them to me. I like doing the teaching. I'll just refer them to another certified behavioral sleep specialist. But I think it's just important to look at it through a different lens and not be turned off or to not shy away, I guess would be my recommendation would be don't shy away. Ask more questions. Just because the family says the word sleep, don't automatically think it's not within your scope. I would argue that sleep, as we look at it as a contingency, and we look at it as sleep being the primary reinforcer, and everything else during the day, during the bedtime routine, everything else is subject to the contingency. There are lots of ways that we can intervene at a very low level that will give a big bang for the family's buck, so to speak, right? There are things if we teach some calming strategies during the day, we can say, hey, you can do these calming strategies at bedtime too, so that bedtime is easier. We can find, alternatives to screen time. We can find alternatives to jumping and crashing and running. We can do that stuff during the day, independent of sleep, but then saying, hey, like we have 6 or 7 activities now that your child's able to complete. This would be great to do during bedtime because it's compatible with calming the body down. Hey, I now know that there's a sleep problem. Let's figure out if there are some things during the day that we can do to support your goals at bedtime. It might not be perfect if you haven't, I don't expect everyone to go through a certification program. That's not sustainable for the entirety of behavior.
Wouldn't that be cool though to have like 3,000 certified sleep specialists? That's amazing.
One day, one at a time, Shayna, one at a time. I'm a slow and steady wins the race kind of person.
Yeah.
I'm very
No, but I love that you pointed it to like learning. Like we should always come back to learning instead of just similar. Don't just rip off the Band-Aid and just take on your first sleep client. We have to learn about it. But with the research, we have to be asking those questions because we are the ones practicing. And we can find research that's kind of ambiguously on many topics within ABA. But I think this came up in our conversation about melatonin. Like there is research to support the use, but is it good research or is it the ones that's looking at the right kind of factors that we want it to look at? And knowing that practice is sometimes very different than research, still discriminating and like asking the right questions and knowing what our families really need.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's so important.
Absolutely. And, I think on top of that, many BCBAs who have their own children, or who have, been around a while, sort of default to the things they know about, their infants and, the infant sleep books that are out there and, the parenting books and things like that. And those things aren't wrong, but they don't necessarily translate perfectly to our population. And so what I do see is that BCBAs give advice based on things that they've seen on like mommy blogs or on Instagram or, in a baby sleep training book or something like that. And some of the core principles are there. Some of the foundation is there. But if we just walk into a house and give them the kind of a sleep plan that we would give to, a 1-year-old or a 9-month-old or something like that, it is going to end up in those big behaviors. It is going to end up with an aversive outcome, in my opinion. I mean, I can't state that for fact. I mean, I'm sure for equally as many families that those strategies work for, there's probably an equal number of families where they don't work. But that's where we get to individualize things and really get to know our learners and our families cultures and our families' values and really like lean in and hear what they really want and what they really need.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I mean, we could talk forever because I love the topic and I love talking to you and it's so interesting. But we are going to share with people how they can learn more about the Sleep Collective, and hopefully your sleep assessment tool will be available pretty soon for us to use in practice.
I'm so looking forward to that, Emily. Like,
what'd you say? I didn't hear you.
I said, I'm so looking forward to that.
Oh gosh, I know. Research is so slow. It's not my jam.
Slow and steady, remember?
I know.
Slow and steady. Come on, Emily.
No, I just said slow and steady is my thing. But when it comes to like results, I'm like, can we just finish this up?
I know. Yeah.
Just get the results. I just really want to know.
So we'll definitely share the link though when it becomes available, which is awesome.
Absolutely. Yes. We're closing in on the end. I feel the finish line. I feel it.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. And yeah, we love hanging with you.
Always great catching up, Emily. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Take care, you guys.